We'd like to welcome all of our listeners today to Music for Good, a podcast with the Bombay Jazz Club. I'm your host, Dee Wood, and our guest today is the prolific drummer and tabla player, Ko Omura. The true world citizen, Ko is currently based in Tokyo. So Ko, a very warm welcome to our podcast.
It's a great honor to participate in this podcast.
Well, glad to have you. Glad to have you as our esteemed guest. You know, you've been with us kind of from the beginning of the Bombay Jazz Club. Your first trip to India. We met on your first trip to India. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was it was even like the fourth day I arrived. I recall it was like the 2nd or 3rd of February I arrived. I don't know. I can't remember the exact date, but
okay. What year?
2013.
13. And, we're talking 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly 7 years. And I didn't know anybody in India, and I just randomly met a few people. Some people connected me on the internet, which happened to be Tala.
Tala Faral, our great friend.
Yeah, exactly. He was a
from
big
Madagascar.
Part of yeah, exactly, from Madagascar, Africa, and he lives in DC right now. I believe
in DC,
he's still
that's
there.
Right. Yeah.
And he's kind of hopped around the world. Beijing. He was even in Beijing, I think. You know, he was.
Yeah, his wife is in the American State Department, and they get posted to all these exotic places.
Exactly. So he met my friend who I toured the Middle East in back around that time, and he just messaged me. This great musician is there in Bombay. He's not Indian, but his background is African, but he's kind of hopping around, and he's in Mumbai. So you know, why don't you hit him up? So he actually messaged Tala too, and Tala messaged me, and Tala was living in a Santa Cruz West.
That's right.
And my first and still my host family, a Gujarati family.
Yeah, you were just around the corner from your place is just around the corner from where Tala used to be in that luxurious residence, courtesy of the American government.
So we caught up, and Tala, first thing he said to me, which was really impressionistic, it was like, to be honest, brother, I didn't know, but you're so close, so we had to meet. But it was so cool, you know. That was his first. It was great, you know. He's honest guy. So
from the heart,
you know, I understand totally where he's coming from, because you know, if it's a foreigner in a different city, and it doesn't matter if you're in London or New York or Tokyo, and you know, some friend that you met on the road on tour introduces you to somebody else, it's like, yeah, it's like, well, you know, like, that's nice gesture, but you know, if the timing matches, you know, you don't want to be too committed to that situation, because you got your daily chores and everything. So it was really a coincidental thing when Tala was like, made the time for me, and which I feel really honored. And you know, he was really honest about, I didn't know about you, man, you know, but we were so close with me. So I loved his honesty, and you know, we hit it off, and then he said, you know, you got to meet this guy, D Wood. He's the American guy. He's just down the road. So that's how I met you. Yeah,
I know, man. That was incredible. Well, that was. I didn't realize it was 4 days in then when you met us at the fledgling Bombay Jazz Club, man. And you know, you've been a regular feature every year.
So yeah, I mean, it's been a great honor, just, you know, participating and sharing the stage with you, and all the connections that you've made. Even, I mean, before it was named the Bombay Jazz Club, I think I was kind of around with that whole scene. And
well, before we really it was taking shape, and we were doing under that name, but we've become a formal entity since the time. But I was saying we were in our formative stages then, and what was interesting is that not only did you meet the whole gang here, but you've been bringing a steady stream of Japanese musicians to India, man. You're kind of like the India go-to guy in Japan, and when you're here studying, people come to visit you, and you introduce them to the local culture, which has been amazing. We've built bridges with so many people in Japan through you. We've done a hell of a lot of music when you think about it, going back, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going back to, it was around 2000, circa 2015, 14. I can't remember, but like Aki Nishiguchi, who's a prominent tenor saxophone player in Japan, and he plays internationally, and he's got a few records under his name. I'm really fortunate that I'm on one of his records, his second album I'm on. But not just Japan, but Yu Ying. You remember Yu Ying?
Yu Ying from Taiwan.
From Taiwan, yeah. I met her.
Played with her.
We played. I toured with her in Taiwan and Hong Kong and China, and we had a nice rapport. So she was like, "Wow, you're in India. Fascinating place. I'd love to visit." And she just bought a ticket and came along, and we did some performances together. I remember those days. And then Makoto Nakamura,
Makoto was pianist. Jun was there. Jun Furia.
Exactly, Jun Furia, and he's another great pianist. He was a Berkeley student back in the 90s, and he's kind of was a part of Darren Barrett's quartet. He's done a lot of work in the States, and then he came back to Japan, but he decided not to live in Tokyo, just on the outskirts, which is Yamanashi. Great prefecture for just a lot of natural resources, really great vineyards actually in Japan. One of the best wines in Japan come from Yamanashi. So he kind of grows his own wine and stuff too, and he's kind of really into that whole food culture and wine culture. Yeah, but he's a really serious musician, and Jun as well. And also because I've grown up in Australia.
Well, that's right. You brought Steve Barry and Jess Pollard.
Steve Barry, Jess Pollard, Mike Rivet.
Mike Rivet came.
And also with Bungalow, Koichi Sato.
That's right, your own band. You brought your whole band.
Which was really great at NCPA.
Right.
Koichi is he writes for like a lot of anime, cartoons, and film music right now in Japan.
Wow.
And he's a great jazz pianist, as you can tell by the way he plays, and he's a great improviser. He does a lot of like free improv underground projects in Japan, as much as he writes for kind of major TV film stuff in Japan right now. So I mean, all these people have kind of had touched base with India in the scene there, which I feel really kind of happy that culture is kind of always mixing and matching. And India,
man, we brought a lot of people together over the 7 years. In context, in this part of town, we all played in Bandra, and then some of the other clubs, and so it's been great. But what I wanted to ask about, Ko, is what brought you to India in the first place? Because that's really interesting, because not only did it bring you here once, but it's brought you back for an annual pilgrimage. So interesting to know what's the deal.
Actually, that's actually really, I feel honored to being asked that question, or that question is a really heavy question for me, because I've gone through a lot. It's been a big procedure. So if I go back in time, when I first got mesmerized with Indian music, it was Zakir Hussain, who's a super exponent of the Punjab Gharana in tabla. And I listened to a lot of his tabla when I was studying jazz in Australia, Sydney Conservatorium, and I was like, wow, what is this alien rhythmic language? It just fascinated me. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to analyze it. It was just like mind blowing. I just had this pleasure of listening to his tabla playing, and I found out that his father, Alaraka Khan Abaji, was a super exponent. I mean, he was like a genius, innovator,
to say the least. He essentially gave the tabla its pride of place in the hierarchy of Indian instruments and music making.
exactly. So I started listening to Abaji's playing, and I became a huge fan, or I mean, I don't want to just say fan. It was just divine for me, you know, like what I was listening to. And I had no knowledge about Hindustani classical music at the time. I was more focused on jazz playing, but on the side, I was listening to all these jazz greats like John Coltrane, you name it. You know, I don't want to drop names, but you know, like all the Blue Note legends like Hank Mobley. I can go on forever.
Yeah.
But you know, that music had a huge impact on me. So my focus was more on like New York, you know, like I wanted to visit New York and just see what that was about. But always on deep inside me, I had this like longing for India. And I was like, someday, you know, but back in Australia, I did buy a set of tablas back then when I was like 20 or something. And
Wow, from a gift shop, souvenir shop.
exactly, like, and you know, I had no idea how what na or da or ge or tin or din was. And you know, like I had a friend who was from India back then, because Australia being a multicultural place too,
I'm
as much as
cosmos.
yeah. So and so he was like, oh, tabla, you know, that's like a heavy art form. So you need to go to India to really get authentic about it. So I was like, wow, that's a fair opinion. Like, that's cool. Like, I would love to, but you know, I didn't get around to it until way later. So after Australia, I came back to Japan because I was like, oh, being Japanese, I grew up in the States and Australia. I never really explored music in Japan. So I decided to place myself in Tokyo and, you know, try to suss out the scene there. And I was just, you know,
Which
playing.
is the part of one of the questions I was going to ask you has to do with that. How is your overseas experience as a student, fledgling musician? How did that kind of put you into a unique place in Japanese society after having been kind of a man of the world in your formative stages, and then coming back to Japan, and you have a completely unique mindset, given that culture, which is so, and dare I say, in ways ritualistic.
Yeah, that's a really deep topic to touch, because I still think about that, and I still kind of contemplate on my identity on that issue, or just that state, because I look Japanese, but you know, people, to be blatantly honest, people don't see me that I'm Japanese, because I'm kind of like always traveling, and I was just like, you know, oh, isn't he, like, some people even joke around me like, isn't he Indian now? You know, like I'm like,
Okay.
and oh, isn't
They're
he
just
like,
jealous, Dad.
wasn't he Australian? Oh, is he American?
Uh,
The, Japan being an island country, and I love the culture here. There's so much
oh,
fascinating things that surprise me here. But at the same time, when I got back, it was a blessing and a curse at the same time, because I did have to face a big identity crisis, you know, it's, if you want to put it that way.
At what age did you migrate back to Japan after Australia and the States?
I was 24, 25, I think. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. But when I was a little kid, I did touch bass a little bit when I was like 12, 13, I think, around
Mm-hmm.
the time. And then back from the States, I did like a brief encounter in Japan, and then shifted to Australia. So after my formative years, when I got back as a grown adult, 25, I could probably say grown adult. But, you know, like when you talk
Yeah.
about, um, there's always space to learn as till the day we
Yeah. Well,
die.
you've
So, you know,
finished your formal education. Probably you finished college by then, and you
yeah.
reinventing yourself in a new place. But be, that's the interesting part. You're Japanese, but you're also a man of the world. Therefore, you have your own identity, and you're looked at as a different type of creature.
Yeah, so back to your question, when you asked me, how how did you kind of perceive that situation, it was like, it was a blessing and a curse, because I had to deal with, well, people don't see me Japanese here, or they do see me Japanese, and there's always that like kind of two sides of the coin, which I had to deal with, which, when I think about it, I did have to go through some hard grind work in the conscious headspace,
Mm-hmm.
but in the long term, it kind of, and for me, still ongoing as I'm speaking, but it has fed me a lot of contemplation on identity, and and actually that actually made me really want to go to India, because back to the first question when you asked me, oh, how did you actually get to India after all this stuff, like traveling around the world, or like growing up in different places, and when I was mesmerized by the Punjab Gharana of Zakir Hussain and Ala Aga Khan, and then when I was in Japan after doing a lot of gigs and tours, when you remember that big atomic power plant
Fukushima.
accident, Fukushima,
oh, yeah.
2011.
2011.
So yeah, so when that happened, there was so much social friction with that narrative in the news and just local consensuses, and I was really confused with what I thought of my home country people. Some people react this way, some people react that way. Same thing happened to this Corona thing too, but back then it was a big kind of a head spinner for me. So I was like in this headspace of like, oh, I just want to drop everything. I don't want to be playing music for a while here. That's what I felt really back then.
Oh, just get out of town.
I just wanted to get out of town. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could imagine.
And that, when something big like that happens, like Chernobyl class.
Yeah, traumatic, man. Yeah,
I just wanted to get out. So I was like, well, this must be the perfect time for the long lost land that I've never actually had the courage to visit. India, what a mysterious place. All this history, all this religion, spirituality, culture, food, everything, like, wow, I'm just going to drop everything to spend a few months there, So that's the first initiative that actually kicked my ass to go over to India. And that was 2013. That was the year I met you. So, yeah. The first trip was intense. I mean, I didn't know many people, and thank God I met Tala and got introduced to you, and gradually, and Hideaki was there. You remember Hideaki?
Yeah.
Yeah, great Hideaki Tokunaga, a great guitarist, Japanese guitarist.
Incredible Japanese guitar player, man. Who was a real hit when he left town. Because he was ready to go, moment's notice, any time, any tempo, any tune, ready to rock. We were gigging all the time, and it was incredible playing with him.
He's one of those guys where, he's been in LA for such a long time, and he's hung with those top American guys, but he can go anywhere in the world and just like hang, like with music, and it's just with his guitar.
He'll show up and play his ass off.
Yeah, he's like a ninja guitarist,
Oh, absolutely, a million percent, man.
So
you guys were really there when this whole kind of new wave of energy, of international energy, kind of came to town. Because as we said before,
that's right.
It's kind of been an outpost, like kind of a far afield from the international music scene, as far as people living, spending more than just coming through and leaving to go to another festival in another continent. That was kind of the first wave of a lot of musicians coming and being in town at the same time. And it was a huge game changer, because, maybe you'd get a gig, but you couldn't find people who were available to play. And all of a sudden, you guys started coming in, and also on a regular basis. So it was a huge sea change in Bombay in terms of being able to do jazz and do music that was, part of that international culture. So it was really incredible. But the other thing I wanted to mention, you hit the jackpot, man, because you somehow were selected to study with one of the greatest maestros living on the planet as we speak, Yogesh Samsi, Panditji himself.
Yeah,
right, man.
Definitely. I mean, I can't describe. I mean, for me, I'm speechless with still when I think about that. actually on my birthday, there was a meeting, a Zoom hang with the Gurubais and Guruji, and
in honor of your birthday.
Well, they celebrated my birthday on Zoom, which was, and Guruji was like, it's Ko's birthday. Why don't you recite a few tukras and guts?
Wow, what a present, man.
And, I like being surrounded by all these super monstrous future tabla maestros and, like trying to recite compositions by Abaji, Alaraka Kansab, and, like it's mind-boggling, but I mean, at the same time, it was so comforting, and being part of the family. And
yeah, to actually reach out to you thousands of miles away to include you and make you feel, like you're part of a brotherhood. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just like, I never expected that to happen when I first came to Mumbai to learn from him, because, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of his capacity and his artistic prowess. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, he's second to none.
Yeah, he's like history class, and it's ridiculous. Yep. And he's a genius, and also like a alchemist in the highest order of that style. It's just unbelievable to see that kind of phenomenon of rhythmic artistry. Just anyway, it's beyond words. So I feel really honored to study with him, and I don't know what I did right, but I've had a really good relationship with Guruji, Pandit Yogesh Samsi, and it's been an engine, a fuel for my riyaz, if you want to put it that way, to keep practicing what I need to do musically. So that intact. I mean, when I think about it, if I was to time slip back 2011, when I had so many doubts about the confusion in Japan back at the time, with this like nuclear power plant catastrophe going on, like people like trying to nibble each other with their political views.
Yeah, and you at home with a young child, and was your child born at that time?
No, back then at the when Fukushima happened, that wasn't
your children hadn't been born then, huh?
No, I was still single. I mean, I'm
later. Okay.
I'm now single again, but it's just like, but then when I think about it, if I can time slip and say, well, you got a kind of an intense but kind of cool journey ahead. I would say that to myself. If I was to time slip back 9 years.